To give it a couple minutes. Welcome everyone to this live session where we're going to hear from Sandy Brown about pilgrimages in Europe and walking long distance and about publishing guidebooks. We're just waiting for everyone to come in, and I just want to welcome you all to Get Set Up. And again, I see some regulars. I do a lot of travel classes with Get Set Up. And I see quite a few people that are here from those travel classes. So this is yet another way of traveling you can think of. In terms of transportation, walking is the cheapest, but just takes longer to get from one point to another, but you see more while you're going. So, hi, Nathan, welcome. Glad to have you here. And Danya and Carmen. And Sherry. Hi, Sherry. And I see Liz. Hi, Liz. And hi, Michelle. Got a lot of California people here today. I'm going to go ahead and start. We've got a few more people coming in, but get all them in here. I want to welcome everybody. This is our special noon Eastern time, 9 o'clock Pacific time, 6 o'clock Paris time event to hear from Sandy Brown, who is in that Pacific time out on the West Coast. And I want to welcome you all to Get Set Up. A lot of you are regulars, but I'm Russ, a Get Set Up guide, and I'm going to be your host today. If you are new to Get Set Up, we're a community of active older adults who are looking for ways to stay active and inspired. And we're thrilled to have Sandy with us today to discuss his pilgrimages in Europe and the guidebooks he's created with them, and also some of the pilgrim groups he's led. And so we're inspired both by walking and also by how you've managed to take a personal interest and channel it into sort of a vocation. Before we get started, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items for anyone who is live. In other words, you're a learner here with us. We're really glad to have you here. And there will be a Q&A at the end with Sandy, but I also want to just encourage you while he's speaking, go ahead and put your question in the chat, and we'll make sure we field all those questions and see if we can get them all answered at the end. If anyone is also in live with us live, if you'd please mute, that way we won't hear any background noise like a dog barking or the doorbell ringing. If anyone is joining via Get Set Up TV on Facebook or YouTube, you're welcome to put your questions in the comments field there. And again, we'll try to field those and address those questions. Also, again, I mentioned we'll do a Q&A at the end. There may be a chance also just to ask some direct live questions. We'll see how many get put into the chat. I just want to start then with introducing our special guest. Sandy Brown is an author, a community activist, a long distance walker, and an ordained minister from Seattle, Washington. In 2020, Sandy joined Cicerone Press as an associate publisher for Caminos and Pilgrimage Books. He also has written several guidebooks. That's how I first met Sandy, was through his book on the Way of St. Francis, the Via di Francesco in Italy. I actually walked that in 2019. I used his guidebook, and through that got in touch with Sandy and became friends with him. Sandy, besides working at Cicerone Press, I should mention Cicerone Press is the largest publisher of guidebooks in English, I think. Am I right, Sandy?
Largest publisher of outdoor guidebooks. Walking, trekking, mountaineering, biking.
Okay, and they're like one of the top 10 publishers overall in the UK, so they're based in the UK. Sandy says that after reading The Pilgrimage by Paulo Coelho in 1992, he got interested in walking the Camino de Santiago, the Camino Frances in particular, and so he finally walked it in 2008. And since then, he's walked not 9,000 miles, but 12,000 kilometers. Is that right, Sandy? On trails in the US and in Europe and in the US. And when he's not walking, he enjoys yoga, sailing, and piano. He has 2 grown sons, and his wife, Teresa Elliott, is a yoga instructor. We're going to talk today a bit about.
Russ, let me just interject. I should have put there that I have 1 grandchild and 1 grandchild on the way too.
Hey, congratulations to the one on the way. I've seen on Facebook him with the 1 grandchild. Yes, that's great. It's a great period of life to be in.
For sure. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. We're here to hear from you, Sandy. Today we're going to talk about staying active through long distance walking, and we're going to also talk about turning your passion into a new career, and also how to adapt your plans when unexpected challenges like a pandemic arise. And these are a couple of Sandy's book, The Way of St. Francis. That's the first guidebook you did, correct, Sandy?
That's right. Yeah.
With Cicerone, and the one there, Via Francigena Part 2, is the newest one. And I was just mentioning to Sandy that I ordered that yesterday from Cicerone Press, because that's a walk I'm interested in taking. Sandy earned his undergraduate degree in medieval history at the University of Washington in Seattle. He earned his MDiv, Master of Divinity, at Garrett Theological Seminary, which honored him in 2006 as a distinguished alumnus. And he has a doctorate from Princeton in Princeton Theological Seminary in gender, sexuality, and spirituality. And you are now retired as from ministry. You were a United Methodist minister for how many years?
For 32 years.
32 years.
Yeah.
And again, he loves walking and doing yoga and playing piano when he's not traveling. So let me just start with some questions. We heard Sandy's bio, but tell us a bit more about that first pilgrimage you walked and your inspiration to walk it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Russ. And thank you for welcoming me here in this group. I'm excited to be able to share what I do, what I've been up to over these years. And I just want y'all to know, no, I do not dye my hair. I'm as old as Russ pointed out. When you say 32 years of ministry and retired and all that, you expect a grizzled looking guy. I'm grizzled, but somehow my hair has stayed black all this time, except for a few white streaks over here. So in about 1992, I read the book, The Pilgrimage by Paulo Coelho. And what I liked about the book was its kind of combination of magical spirituality and travel log. So I said that I would definitely have to someday walk the itinerary that it described, which is the Camino de Santiago in northern Spain, where you walk from France all the way across Spain and end at Santiago de Compostela. So I read the book in 1992, but it wasn't until I retired for the first time, I should say, when I retired for the first time in 2008, that I was able to do it. So I expected that what my walk was going to be like was I was going to have this month of solitude in a strange country where I would not have any friends, where I'd be isolated and alone. So as I took the train up to the starting place, I saw other people that were also wearing hiking gear. And I kind of resented that fact that I wasn't going to be able to be alone on this pilgrimage walk. Then I started walking the next day. And by about noon, I was already lonely and ready for company. And somebody said to me, "Have you met the American girls yet?" And I said, "What do you mean, the American girls?" And not long afterwards, I heard the sound of American English. And it was 4 college graduates from St. Louis University that were walking together as their postgraduate celebration. And we walked together then for the next many days. And I came to discover that walking is a great joy, but walking and meeting people and spending sometimes days, sometimes weeks, sometimes even a month with somebody as you walk a long itinerary is a really great joy. So I met the 4 American girls. I met a software designer from Ohio. I met a policewoman from Germany. and subsequent pilgrimages, I've made friends, and I feel now like I have friends all over the world. I'm up to my 18th pilgrimage now, and 12,000 kilometers, which I think comes out to something around 8,000 or 9,000 miles. And I do it every year and have a great blast every time. Sorry, Russ,
Yeah, I better unmute myself. There were about 16 years from the time you first read about the Camino de Santiago and when you did your first pilgrimage. How did you plan that first one?
Well, at the time, there were not many resources available for planning. So I went on to an internet forum, which was like a online bulletin board. Remember when we had those back in the day? And Facebook wasn't much of a thing then. And so I asked questions, I learned, I bought a guidebook, and I don't mind giving a plug for guidebooks, as you might assume. I bought a guidebook, and the guidebook had a packing list, and it had directions for how to get to the starting point and how to get home from the ending point. So I bought it all. I knew that one of the worst things you can do is bring too much stuff. So I carefully sorted out what I was going to bring. And my wife gave me a greeting card for every week that I would be walking. And it was going to be 6 weeks. And so it was 6 greeting cards. And each greeting card probably weighed about 2 ounces. And 6 cards together were 12 ounces. So the first thing I did when I got to my first stop was I opened up and read all of the greeting cards, and then I tossed them away. And my wife was like, "Are you kidding? How could you possibly do that?" And my answer was, well, every ounce is a big deal. And so to carry 12 ounces of greeting cards with me was just going to be too much. So part of it in preparation was making sure that I managed my fears and that I was only packing what I absolutely needed. Even then, I got some things wrong. I wore shoes in the springtime that didn't have enough waterproof aspect. And so by about 10 days into it, because it was rainy weather, my feet were covered in blisters. So when I got to the next big town, I bought a better pair of shoes to wear and continued to try to adapt every step of the way. But it was really a guidebook that helped me out. It was somebody else that took the time to write suggestions about what to do. And I really appreciate that. Now, one of my guidebooks is in direct competition with his. But, you know, the more guidebooks, the merrier, because people need a lot of help as they get started on these long distance walks.
Trying to keep any background noise out. On the one hand, it's really important to not over prepare, not over plan, overthink something, because you want to have spontaneity, but you really have to do at least some planning and be prepared, because you know, there's things that most of us don't walk long distances every day, so we don't stop to think about blisters or types of shoes. The other thing about a guidebook is that you'd really be kind of ashamed to walk through one of the world's great cultural heritages, maybe something 1,000 or 2,000 years old, and not know that you walked right past it. Say a bit more about walking alone, about walking solo and solitude.
Yeah. Well, on the Camino Frances, the Camino de Santiago, you can be alone as much or as little as you want, because in a normal year, probably about 300 or so people leave the starting point on the same day and roughly at the same time, someplace in the morning. And then more and more people join that wave as they start a little bit later on the trail. And some people start as late as 100 kilometers on the trail. So at any one day on the trail, you may see 50 or 100 people. Now that's the Camino Frances. My next Camino was the Via de la Plata, where I walked on the Sonabrace route from Puebla de Sanabria to Santiago de Compostela. And I only met one person that entire time. He happened to be a colonel in the Estonian army, and he loved to talk about theology. But otherwise, I was by myself. And in most of my pilgrimages, that's the way it works. So when you're by yourself, then it presents a new kind of opportunity. For me, the opportunity of being alone is that I get to contemplate and meditate. And so to me, walking is a meditation. And I do it in a kind of an informal way. So I'm walking, I'm focusing on my breathing, I'm emptying my mind, I'm just thinking about very simple kinds of things, and that becomes a gift. So I'm not meditating on something, I am just aware in a different kind of way. So the only things when you're walking long distances that you have to worry about after a few days on the trail is, where am I going to eat and where am I going to sleep? And a few other kinds of things like, how are my feet doing and such. And that's actually itself a big gift, because we are filled with so many other worries and concerns in our daily lives that being out on a walk and being able to have that kind of simplicity is a real plus. And so I empty my mind. I am content to let it just be empty. I don't have to have a content. I'm not listening to my earbuds. I'm listening to the sounds around me. And after a time, it becomes another sort of world. So for instance, on let's say a 6-week walk, I will never have sat inside of an automobile. And sometimes even the sound of an automobile driving past me is annoying, because I've been listening to the birds, I've been listening to the wind, to the sound of the seashore, to my own singing or whistling, to the sounds of my feet as I have each footfall on the gravel or on the ground. And so walking long distance becomes a meditation in simplicity. And I think it carries all kinds of lessons for us in our complicated world, where if we're content to live simply, we can find kind of a happiness that otherwise is elusive to us in our lives.
Yesterday with Linda Harris, who organized the We Walk with Harriet walk from kind of the Underground Railroad Freedom Trail in Eastern Maryland up to Philadelphia. She said a lot of the same thing. And I know from my own experience in walking the Camino de Santiago, there's a change that happens when you are walking outdoor all day, every day for a long period of time. And I think you've explained that well. And so that's just a huge benefit that a lot of us don't know is coming to us when we begin to do a pilgrimage like this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You focus on being outside. That's really it, because a lot of our time otherwise is spent inside. And when you get up in the morning and you're out the door at 7 o'clock and you don't come back inside until 7 p.m., and especially right now when, or at least the last 3 months, last year, when restaurants were closed or even eating outside, you might get something for takeout and eat it on a curb or sitting on a path. That's completely different. It's different life. Of course, I'm spraying myself with sunscreen a couple of times a day. I'm wearing my straw hat, but it's the joy of being outside that's part of the joy of walking. And I think it is a reminder that the way that we're created is to spend a lot of time outdoors. And with the different temperature changes and the feeling of the wind and the sun going up and coming down, and all of those transitions in the day are really a beautiful part of being alive that we miss when we're inside all the time.
You totally said it, Sandy. Being outside is the way we were designed, and I guess the way human beings lived for tens of thousands of years, and it's only recent history have we changed that. Say something, can you, about this is a big one to me, about digital devices and computers and all that. When I walked the Camino de Santiago, I spent very little time on a device. In fact, I brought a book along to read, which a lot of people said, "Why are you carrying that?" I said, "Because why don't you put it on your phone?" I said, "I don't want to look at my phone."
Yeah. People don't want to hear this, I think, but I believe it's true that you are spoiling the experience when you are plugged in while you're doing a long distance walk. And I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody by saying that, but imagine that you've got your playlist on your phone, you've got your earbuds in your ears, and you're walking through northern Spain. But what you're experiencing in your brain is Seattle, Washington, or or New Jersey, or Nashville, or Los Angeles, or whatever. And to me, that that almost expresses an addiction. And instead, if you unplug, then you're opening yourself to the experience. And I hate to think that if somebody is walking across the plains of Spain on the Meseta, that they would be listening to Coldplay instead of hearing the sound of the wind and the singing of the birds and the conversation that they might have with somebody else. One time I ran across a pilgrim who had strapped onto his backpack a radio, and he said, "I'm doing this as a favor to the other pilgrims, so you can listen to music while you're walking." It's like, I couldn't get away from him fast enough, because first of all, it was the music that he chose, not the music that I chose. And secondly, it was tainting the experience with something that was completely foreign to it. And if I'm going to walk a long distance, I want to be able to hear and taste and smell what I'm experiencing all around me.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I had a playlist and some music. I think I listened to it once in 5 weeks of walking. And that was probably, there's a section of road where you go along a highway with truck stops. It's kind of like in the US. It was pretty boring. But one thing I noticed, I live in an area where there's a lot of bird songs. So I wake up to the sound of the birds. But I noticed in Spain, I was listening to different bird songs. And I was very attentive to the birds in front of me, the birds' songs. So you really open your mind up to nature.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is that if you plug in, let's say at night, and you're in your bed and you have a hard time getting to sleep, that's the time for your earphones, because then you can go to sleep to some music that'll help you sleep. So, or maybe a book on tape that'll help you drowse off. So it's not that there's no place for them. It's that if you close yourself off to the experience as you're walking, then you're missing something.
That's exactly right. You want to be there and not be there, but somewhere else in your head the time that you're walking. Tell us a little bit about your other experiences. Again, I encountered you as the author for the guidebook for the Way of St. Francis. So how did you get from this Camino de Santiago, where, by the way, you were leading tours, to Italy?
Well, it's kind of fun because, let's see, I walked my first Camino in 2008, and then I continued to walk in Spain in 2010, 2011, 2012. And then a friend that I met who was from Vienna said, well, maybe we should exchange our affection for Santiago, St. James, with St. Francis and walk in Italy instead. And I said, Jacqueline, I don't know anything about the Italian Camino, so would you mind researching this and figuring out where we're supposed to go? And she did all of the work. And 3 of us met her, and then the 4 of us walked from Assisi to Rome in 2013. And it was a great experience. You know, I had proposed a guidebook to Cicerone Press on the Camino del Norte after I walked it, because I had used the French guidebook and Spanish websites in order to walk that Camino. And there wasn't a guidebook in English. And when I contacted Cicerone Press, they said, well, we're working on one right now. It should be out in about 6 months. So I was super disappointed in that because I really wanted to contribute. But then I realized that the Way of St. Francis, the Via di Francesco, didn't have a guidebook. And so I proposed that guidebook to Cicerone, and they said yes. So then the next year, I went by myself. I spent a month in Italy to learn Italian. I walked the route for a month, and then I parked myself in a little apartment in Perugia, Italy, so that I could write the basic outline of the book. Then I came back home because I was limited to 90 days. And that's really how I got my start. Now, the Way of St. Francis book is in its third printing, and it's been a successful little guidebook. Then Cicerone Press asked me to write a guidebook on the Camino Frances, the main Camino route, which I did. And I agreed with them that if I did that guidebook for Cicerone Press, they would have to let me write the Via Francigena guidebook, which they have and which I've been writing. So pretty soon they asked me if I would be associate publisher of Cicerone Press for pilgrimages and Caminos. And I said yes to that to help other guidebook writers. So that's how it got started. And I'm in the midst of it still.
So in many ways, your journey with writing guidebooks is kind of like a journey on a pilgrimage. You never know what quite is going to happen next, but something surprising turns up for you, just when you weren't expecting it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to give a little context to people who don't know it, the Camino Frances, which is the most commonly walked route of the Camino de Santiago, starts in southwest France, crosses over into Spain, and then goes for 500 miles to Santiago de Compostela in northwest Spain. And the route that we were just describing, the Way of St. Francis, is about 300 miles. It's 350 miles.
525 kilometers.
525 kilometers, a little over 300 miles from Florence to Rome. And it goes through Umbria, and through Assisi, where St. Francis was born and lived. And that's kind of the region of Italy that he was in the most in his life. And then now you're working on a guidebook to a very long pilgrimage, the Via Francigena, which starts in Canterbury, England, and goes all the way to Rome. And how many miles or kilometers is that?
That's 2,200 kilometers, which would be something like 1,400, 1,500 miles.
Okay. And because that's so long, there isn't a single guidebook on that, but with Cicerone Press, you're doing 3 different guidebooks, or there have been 3 different guidebooks, or maybe I think you're redoing one that was maybe a single guidebook and you've broken it into 2 books. Is that right?
Yeah, Cicerone Press about 10 years ago put together a 2-volume guidebook that went from Canterbury to Great St. Bernard Pass in Switzerland, and then Great St. Bernard Pass to Rome. And I decided, and Cicerone agreed, that we would divide it up into 3 guidebooks instead of 2. And one reason is that the French route has lengthened. As France has taken more of a review of it, they wanted to make it more scenic. So they added about 200 kilometers in France. And the other is that if the guidebook splits it at Great St. Bernard Pass, and you see a kind of a funny thing happen, people decide that they're going to start at the top of the Great St. Bernard Pass. And if they do that, then they miss the Swiss side of the Great St. Bernard Pass, which is the pretty side. So starting in Lausanne, Switzerland, that allows 7 days to get to the top of the Great St. Bernard Pass, which is 8,400 feet in altitude, and then to go on to Rome from there, which is another 1,000 kilometers, about 700 miles. So I'll be going back to France to finish volume 1 of that series now. So this year, in addition to my 1,600 miles on the California Missions Trail, I'll do another about 800 miles in France and Switzerland on foot.
Now, for some people that aren't familiar, I know it gets up. I've spoken about walking the Camino de Santiago, but let's give folks some context. When you're walking let's go back to Camino de Santiago. I averaged about 15 miles a day, which is about 25 kilometers, I imagine. And most of the guidebooks have broken it down to stages somewhere around that average. And then that amounts to something like 5 to 6 hours of walking a day. And then at night, I stayed in albergues, which I'm thinking you did also. There are many options for lodging along the way of the Camino de Santiago, though you don't have to stay in albergues. So maybe you should describe the albergues a little bit and some of the other lodging options.
Sure, sure. An albergue is a hostel, and the size of a sleeping room in an albergue can be anywhere from 4 beds to 100 beds. So it's a little surprise when you get to an albergue or a hostel and you walk in and you see 50 double bunk beds in the room. And so my wife and I were stopping at an albergue in a town called Osabrero. And we stood in line to get our bed assignment. And the person in line said, okay, we're giving you bed number 34 and 36. And I thought, no, wait. I want to be next to my wife. I don't want to be away from her. And so I asked for bed number 35. And the helper at the hostel said, no, we don't usually do that way, but we'll give you bed number 35 if you want. And so then we got in and we realized that it was bed 34, bed 35 on top, and then right next to it was another set of bunk beds with bed 36 and 37. So I had ended up asking for the top bunk of the bunk bed, which left Teresa on the bottom bunk right next to another bed. And so we thought, okay, who's going to show up for this other bed? And it ended up that 2 big, burly, hairy Italian guys were in the beds next to us. And so I had arranged for my wife to have to sleep next to this big, hairy Italian guy. So things can go wrong if you don't follow the exact guidance of people when you get set up. In that room, there were about 35 double bunk beds. And this is all pre-COVID. Now they have greatly reduced the capacity of the sleeping areas. And so it's about half of that or less than half. But typically in a European hostel, you'll have a dormitory that is both sexes. And then you'll have bathrooms. And the bathrooms are divided a little bit differently. And Americans have to get used to this. The stalls, like the toilet and the shower stalls, are private, but the sinks are unisex. So you may be brushing your teeth next to somebody of the opposite sex that just got out of the shower. And you kind of get used to a little bit, it's being a little bit closer to members of the opposite sex than you would be in an American hostel where things are completely divided, male, female. But the hostel experience ends up being one of the great parts of the Camino life, because when you're not sleeping, then you're maybe cooking dinner together, or you're sitting together to have a refreshment, or you're just talking, or you're doing your laundry together. And oftentimes that means at an outdoor sink with a scrub brush where you're washing your clothes and then hanging them on a clothesline. So that's one of the most social times of outdoor walking. It's really one of the cool parts of being on a Camino, where there are regularly spaced hostels, so that that kind of experience happens on a very regular basis.
So when you're in the hostels or in the albergues in Spain, there's a lot of capacity because a lot of people walk it. What do you experience in Italy?
In Italy, there's a similar arrangement, but the hostels are much smaller. So you may find yourself at a small room inside of a church or inside of say a city hall. And it may be a room of about, say, the size of a bedroom in a suburban house in the United States. But there may be 3 double bunk beds, and that may sleep 6 people. And then there'll be a very simple bathroom and shower nearby. So the smaller, or the hostels are just a little more modest in Italy because of the numbers of people involved. On the Camino de Santiago, in a normal year, up to 300,000 people walk. On the Via Francigena, combined with the Via di Francesco, it would be about 20,000 people a year. So a very great difference in capacity and numbers of pilgrims.
And in addition to the hostels, there are other places, especially in the Camino de Santiago, where a person can stay. So we might have some people with us who imagine there's no way I'm going to sleep in a room with 70 people,
Right.
but they've got other accommodations.
Yeah, and you have many different choices, but there are varieties of hotels. For instance, an hostal is a family-run hotel. A hotel typically is a place where there's 24-hour service at the front desk. And you go and you get your room, and it's a private room with a bathroom inside. A pension might be a place where there are private bedrooms, but a shared bathroom. And it's a different experience. So in the times that I've walked and I've stayed in hotels and there are hostels nearby, I might, close my room in the hotel, walk over to the hostel, ask permission to do my laundry there so that I can do my laundry along with other pilgrims. Otherwise, in a hotel, there's not that experience. And I sound like a total social butterfly. But when you've been all alone all day long, and then you see somebody that you want to hang out and spend time with them. And so that's a very common occurrence.
Last year, you had plans to go back to Italy, and that didn't happen. And so you made an adaptation, and you went to the California Mission Trail on bikes.
Yeah.
So say a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was extremely disappointing. My wife and I were going to move to Italy. And one of the things that I've run up against is that an American or Canadian or Brit or Australian can only stay in the Schengen European countries, the ones that have this common treaty for immigration, can only stay for a maximum of 90 days every 180 days. So if I need 100 days to do my itinerary, then I have to come back and split it in two. So my wife and I went to the consulate in San Francisco in January of 2020 to apply for elective residency in Italy that would give us the ability to live there year round so we could do this Camino work. And January of 2020 was the start of it all. And in fact, the first COVID cases in the US were right here in the same county where I live, just north of Seattle. So by March, it was clear I would have to cancel all of my plans for the year. I had put together some tours where I was leading friends and other people on some of these walks. I sent all of their deposits back and I hunkered down. But like all of us, I had total cabin fever. I was tired of being locked in. I heard about the California Missions Trail. And so I decided to go ahead and do it. I would have my mask. I would practice, safe social distancing all along the way. And I got on the train. I got a private room, and I went down to Oakland to begin my bike ride on the Missions Trail. And I spent the next about 5 weeks doing the Missions Trail in California. And it was a fabulous experience. So it really meant finding something completely different to do. and then going ahead and doing it. I did it on bike. It was only the second time I'd done a Camino on a bike. And it all came about because some people in California said, why don't we have a guidebook for the California Missions Trail? And so I turned it into a scouting trip. And since then, I've gone back and done the Missions Trail on foot and by bike. In fact, I just got back at the end of last month from that 1,600 miles. So it was a bit of adaptation to find something else to do. And I'm so glad that that project landed in my lap.
That's great. That's the same thing Linda Harris said yesterday, that she started actually a career as a jazz singer, and that all her bookings and everything were canceled. And then she found herself sitting at home feeling like can't go anywhere, can't do anything. And then she mentioned in particular the killing of George Floyd made her, as a Black person, feel very disempowered. What can I do? Work for justice. And this Harriet Tubman walk just popped up. And so she made that adaptation and that switch. And so I just appreciate the way you both did that and discovered that being outside walking is actually something safe to do during a pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. When you're by yourself, you're socially distanced from anybody else. You can take your mask off and just enjoy the great outdoors.
We're going to start doing some Q&A here, but there's a few questions already in the chat that I wanted to ask Sandy about. And this is a good one. This is the one I understand this question too. How do you deal with the reentry into daily life after you've been outside on a pilgrimage? It's been a spiritual experience. You've been in nature. Suddenly you find yourself back in America with its pace and everything.
That's such a great question. And it's really hard. It's very, very hard. The first thing that you notice when you come back is that your body misses walking. So I average about 15 miles. In my last walk in California, I averaged 20 miles. And then I averaged about 55 miles on a bike as I biked it coming back. And my body missed that daily routine. So I lost 15 pounds in my 2 trips on the California Missions Trail. And I'm proud to say I've only gained 5 pounds back. But that's really the challenge. It's, are you going to return to a sedentary life? Or are you going to take the lessons that you learned and the new abilities that you have been able to achieve? Are you going to take those and put them to work? So it's really hard to walk 20 miles when you're living in suburbia. I drive down to Green Lake in Seattle. Those that know Seattle know that it's a lake right inside of the city. And I walk around it either once, twice, or 3 times. So 3, 6, or 9 miles. I can squeeze out about 10 miles. And I enjoy being outside. That's my walk that I do. I haven't touched my bike since I got back home, but that's the physical transformation that happens. And you do have to decide that somehow you're going to continue that work, even though there's not the daily requirement of getting from point M to point MN or to point O or point P. Then there's the mental transformation also. And there's a kind of ambivalence about coming back. The good side of it is you're back with your family, your wife, you're back in your home setting, everything is comfortable. Now you have more than 2 pairs of pants and 3 t-shirts to wear. You can wear anything you want. You're sleeping in your own bed. You don't have to worry about where you're going to sleep that night. You have your loved ones around you. That's all beautiful. But you have to find a way to recapture the quiet. And that's the new challenge. Where do you find the quiet? For me, I find it in reading, and I find it in my daily walks, but it's a challenge. And what it's meant for me is that I plan a long walk every year. single year, and sometimes multiple walks in a single year, so I can get back to the peace and the joy of long distance walking.
Great. So here's a question from one of the learners. When you're in a long distance walk and you're all by yourself, what do you do if you twist your ankle?
That could be a tough thing. I always have my cell phone with me. And so I'd have to call 911 or something like that. I did injure myself one time while I was on the Via Francigena. And what happened was I was walking all day on asphalt. And if you know, roads are always shaped like this if you did a cross section. And so if you're walking on the road, you're always walking at a little bit of an angle. And after a while, that's very, very hard on your feet. So when I can, I walk in the middle of the road, right on the yellow line. In this case, I wasn't able to, and I had to walk like that almost all day long. And my foot ended up with a metatarsal injury, and like twisting my ankle, except farther down in my foot. And I was still 8 miles away from where I needed to go. And there was no town in between. I was out in the farmland. So I just walked very, very slowly. I limped my way back to where I was going. And when I got there, my first concern was, what am I going to do with the rest of my trip? Because this was day 2 of a 30-day trip. So I decided that I was going to have to rest, get a brace, and I might as well do that in a fun place. So I got on the train and I went to Parma, Italy. And I rented a bike because I could still bike even though I couldn't walk very well. And I hung out in Parma for about 4 days. And Parma is a great town. That's where Parmesan cheese comes from. And after 4 days, I was able to walk some, distance, like 8 or 10 miles. So I got back on the train and went to the distance where I would have been if I had been able to continue to walk. And I picked up again. But that meant about 5 days that I had missed on my itinerary. And it took me 3 or 4 days to really get back in complete shape so I could walk the same distances I would otherwise. So it was readjusting my expectations, giving myself time to heal, and then adapting my itinerary based on what I was actually able to do.
Good. Someone here is asking, are you leading any tours, or do you know someone who will be? And I think do we find a link to your tours on the Caminoist?
Yes, you can. I also have a tour site called pilgrimpaths.com. So you can find my 2022 tours there. I'm leading tours in Spain and in Italy. And my son, Luke, is also leading some tours with my little travel business. We bring groups together of a maximum of 12 people, and then we walk these great pilgrim itineraries. So pilgrimpaths.com is my website.
We'll make sure one of the support staff gets that into the chat or into the notes at the end. So that's great. Let's see. One more person asks, Nelda asks, what is in the guidebook?
Oh, well, what's in the guidebook is let's see, I have my Camino de Santiago guidebook here. It's actually in 2 volumes. So there's a volume that describes the route, and then there's a map book that goes with it. So in the map book, you have maps of each stage, and then also maps of the little towns that you go through as well. So that's a pretty handy resource because you never get lost with the map book. But in the guidebook itself, you'll have an introductory section that tells you how long you're walking, how long between services. You have a basic description of each stage that you might walk in a day. Then you have an elevation profile, and you can see in this profile, it's pretty flat. Then a description of the place where you're going to be. So it's how to get there, what you want to see when you get there, how to prepare, what the terrain and scenery is going to be like. And to give you an example of why it's helpful, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, Russ, I was walking on the Camino de Santiago, and I had turned left, take a little bit of a fork, walk about 30 feet, and climb up a bank. And looking down from the bank, I was looking at the foundations of a Celtic castro city that's 2,500 years old. So I knew to do that because I had researched it. But then I stood on the bank and I looked to the right, and I could see all of these walkers that passed it right by, having no idea that if they'd taken an extra 30 seconds, they would be on that bank with me, and they'd be looking out at the oldest site that they would see on their entire journey. And so the purpose of the guidebook is so that you take full advantage of the airplane ticket and the week or the month that you have set aside for this walk, and you actually are seeing the best things that there are to see. So a way to use the guidebook is the night before, you read about what you're coming up to. You tuck it away in your backpack. You have that in your mind, what you're going to see. You have the map book in your hand, if that's the route, if that's the guidebook you're using, and you walk. But you know what you're looking for so you don't miss it.
That's great. We've done just a couple more minutes. Any more questions for Sandy? You can unmute yourself or raise a hand or raise a virtual hand and ask a question.
You know, while people are waiting, I could just finish the story for you with my wife and the burly Italian guys. So through the evening, I did things like I lowered a towel down between the beds so that she wouldn't have to sleep right next to the guy. Here's my wife right here, by the way. I'll verify the story. And I said, well, you could put your head here and then his head would go the other way. And she's like, give it up. It's going to be just fine. And sure enough, it was just fine. She was much more relaxed about it than I was.
So Carolyn Platt's got a question. Carolyn.
I was just going to comment before I climbed Kili, some of my students told me to wear knee-high nylons and it prevented the blisters. And they were right.
Yeah. That's a variation of a theory of blisters, which is that the primary reason you get blisters, you got your foot inside of a sock and the foot is moving around inside of the sock and you get blisters because of that friction. So with the nylons, what happens is the nylons stick, or I also do this with silk sock liners or spandex kind of socks. They stick to your foot so thoroughly that there's not as much friction. And your foot and the sock slide together around inside of your boot or shoe. So it's a good suggestion. And I've incorporated that into my own strategy for blister prevention too. In 800 miles on my last Camino, I had one blister, it was a little bit painful for a day. I took care of it and had no more blisters in 800 miles.
Okay, last question. Someone says if you don't have a full month to take off, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, what would you suggest? Any walks you would recommend to someone?
Yeah, well, two. Number one, I would say walk from León to Santiago on the Camino Frances of the Camino de Santiago. It's a great walk. It's across two mountain ranges, so it's not necessarily easy, but it's in forests, it's along pathways, and you get a real feeling for what a Camino is like. Second choice, if you're in shape and you're ready for a challenge, start in Lausanne and walk to Lausanne, Switzerland, and walk to Ivrea, Italy, where you cross over the Great St. Bernard Pass. 2 days of kind of tough uphill walking, about 10 miles a day, gaining about 3,000 feet elevation. But when you get to the top, you get to where St. Bernard established his hospice 1,000 years ago. You see where the St. Bernard dogs were bred in order to help out stranded hikers. And you're in the midst of the Alps. And it's a very accessible way to experience crossing the Alps. And so those are just two examples of some great things you could do.
Okay. We'll do one more question. Someone asked on Facebook, how do you prepare physically?
Oh, I think it's good to train in advance. Some people say, you can just train while you're walking. I think that especially if you're not used to long distance walking, you should start working up your distances with your backpack on. And that means start at what your current capacity is. If you can walk 3 miles, no problem, then walk 3 miles, add your backpack, and then every week add another mile to your distance. And that way you can slowly build up your stamina to be able to do the walk. The most important thing about the training is not just your cardiovascular ability, your strength, it's also being certain that your socks and your shoes and your backpack are working in such a way that you're not going to start getting blisters or tendonitis, because those are two things that would end your walk if you're in some foreign country and you're unable to treat those well. So do some training, get your distances up with the backpack on, and that'll help you lose weight as well, if that's an issue for you, as it is usually with me. And then you're ready to enjoy your walk from day one.
Great advice. Great advice. Well, we're pretty much at the end of our time with Sandy. And I really want to thank you, Sandy, for being with us. This has been a great experience. I think we've learned a lot. We've enjoyed hearing your story and about your many pilgrimages, which I envy. I'd love to take more myself. We'll take more myself before too long. So I'm looking forward to that. Also to using your guidebooks. If you want to continue learning about Sandy and his walks, you can follow him on Facebook and also on his blog and website, which you'll get the information about that in your show, in your class notes, in your email at the end of this. I want to thank the audience for being here, especially those of you in the front row, those who registered for the class and have been live. You've had a real treat. I'm glad to have you here. You can request a recording of this event by emailing help@getsetup.io. And if anyone is new to Get Set Up, we hope that you've enjoyed this and can come back. There are over 500 classes weekly you can take, all designed for older adults and taught and guided by older adults. That's one thing that makes Get Set Up unique. The classes are free. There's also other ways you can join the community. You can even become an ambassador, a guide, lead a session yourself. So I want to really encourage you all who are new to look more into Get Set Up. And we hope to see many of you in future Get Set Up classes. There's some examples here along the bottom, like the photo challenge of the week. These are many fabulous photography classes you can take with our great guide, Scott Sleek. And again, there's guest speakers every week. You can come back and hear those. Anything more we need to do before we close today? Well, I really want to thank Sandy for being with us, for all of you who joined us. And it's been a great experience. I've really enjoyed it myself. Wish it could go on longer. Anybody who is inspired to go out walking, please do go grab your shoes or your sandals. As we say, walking is one of those things that pretty much everybody can do. All you need is a good pair of shoes or sandals on your feet. Thanks, everyone again. Thank you, especially Sandy, for being with us. And we hope to see some of you in more classes. And I'll say goodbye.